of us here, or the four of us, including myself, had a really great time connecting and getting to know each other last week. And whether or not this was, coincidence or by design, what we found we had this common theme is that all of us are actually from Midwest companies and very sort of Midwest rooted companies. And so today we're going to be talking a lot about brand identity and relevancy. And so I got that wonderful introduction from Tim. My name is Ann Hill, and I'm the general manager over the food vertical for Fetch. But I'm going to turn it over to my peers here who are going to introduce themselves. And then we have to play like we're all in kindergarten games. So why don't you tell me what your favorite vacation spot is?
Cool, thank you. My name is Phillip Pirkovic. I am the director of brand of Shinola. I'm also a proud son of immigrant parents. So my parents are from Macedonia. So that's probably my favorite vacation spot. I don't get to go a ton, but it's very beautiful.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kayleen Alexson. I lead ESG and enterprise brand strategy for Caribou Coffee, which we are a big brand, small team at the moment, which means my title encompasses internal and external communications, ESG and sustainability, and then community activation, which we kind of pair with our brand activation, how we show up in our community. So I have a small but mighty team that leads those efforts under our brand team and sit parallel to our my counterpart in marketing. Favorite vacation spot has to be earlier this year. I had an incredible opportunity to travel to Guatemala for a coffee sourcing trip and spent some time in Antigua, and it was incredible. I mean, give me a great cup of coffee in the morning, comfortable shoes, walk around. So what started as a work trip turned into a few days of one of the most beautiful and magical places I've ever been. So I highly recommend it. And flights are not that expensive, so check it out.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? First of all, thank you for having us. Really excited to be here. My name is Tony Fung. I lead shopper marketing and e-commerce at Bob Evans. I have to say, one of my favorite places that I have traveled in the past is Bali. And the reason why I love Bali is the people, the culture, they are so kind and humble. Just made me think about, how they're content with what they have. And just talking to locals, that made me feel really good in regards to, how kind they are. So I will absolutely have to say, I highly recommend Bali for those people that haven't been.
Oh, I love that. And I love all the personal stories that came with your vacation spots. Now, I'm going to kind of start with a question that I would love for all three of you to answer, because I think what I thought was also so cool about our prep conversation was that kind of getting back to we're all with like Midwest rooted brands, everyone's in a different vertical. So there was just a really cool nuance. And as we sort of explored some of the questions and discussion that we could have with you all today. So I'll start with, in our ever-changing world, how do you keep your brand identity relevant?
Yeah, I actually love this question. So I think to understand relevancy, you need to understand culture, right? And brands don't create culture, right? Culture isn't created in boardrooms and offices. It's happening outside, right? Culture is created by people and communities. So for me, brands, it's up to us as brands to champion those people and those communities who are actually creating culture, right? So one of my biggest inspirations, Virgil Abloh, rest in peace, had this philosophy of how he created. So he always talked about, whenever he would design something, he talked about the purist and the tourist, right? And the tourist is kind of like your mass audience, your mass consumer. And then the purist is the person who's going to care about the details and the material and the craft. And he talked a lot about how whenever, his approach was always thinking about those two groups of people. No matter like what he was making, it was always about like, if I'm gonna make the best shoe, I wanna know, who is the purist and the tourist of that vertical, or if I'm gonna make the best, DJ set, whatever. So for me, a lot of, what he did and his philosophies, I hold true and like take as, we start to create, right? So I think it's about understanding the mindset first, like the philosophy, and then it's about, understanding culture, right? And I think, the brands that get it right are the brands that put people in positions who are actually a part of these communities and cultures, right? So for us at Shinola Detroit, having a Detroit brand is important, that we hire people from Detroit, right? And it just keeps us grounded and rooted. And then from there, once you have that community backing you, you can go anywhere.
Awesome. There have been so many great conversations this morning about brand relevancy, and I actually have had very short quote from Jess at Kraft Heinz floating around in my head since the first panel this morning of brand relevancy is ensuring that your customers feel seen, right? Like very simple. And that's just been spinning in my head as I think about Caribou Coffee and kind of this interesting spot of brand growth that we're in. And I think the important distinction and what Jess shared and why it's resonating with me is it's making sure your guests feel seen, not that they are seen, right? And so I think that as marketers, it's really easy for us to be like, well, but we're reaching the right people, right? We're in front of the right people, we're talking to the right people, but do they feel seen? And I think when, in a lot of the conversations we've been having at Caribou, and I'll dig into this a little bit in a later question, but we are at this interesting point of brand growth 32 years into our company. So we're 32 years old. We span, a lot of different generations. And so you walk into a Caribou coffee shop, mostly in Minnesota, but also 800 locations across the world. And there's a way that you feel. And there's these brand truths that are true to Caribou. And in all of the research we've been doing and our brand narrative work, it's like what is true no matter where you are, who you're talking to. And I think one of the things for us is just rooted in that brand purpose of creating day-making experiences. And one thing that we actually added to our brand narrative this year, which is the first time I think I'm saying it out loud, not that it's like going to be posted on a billboard somewhere, but is this idea of hosting to create day-making experiences. So it's talking about those, brand relevancy and what's authentically true to Caribou. It's this idea of hosting, right? Like we all have the opportunity to be day makers. We talk about this at Caribou. It could be a good cup of coffee in the morning, a smile at someone, a warm greeting. But this idea of hosting is really, really interesting and I think authentic to us and is why our brand is relevant in Minnesota, but also in our 300 locations overseas. We just opened a store in Morocco that just breeds this like feeling of hosting and feeling like you're somewhere that you belong. And so this idea of hosting, I like to talk about this analogy of like going to a party where you were either hosted really well or not hosted well. And, it's horrible to be at a party where you don't really want to be there. You don't feel like you're welcome. You feel a little bit uncomfortable. You wish you would have just stayed home in your sweatpants. And like, what if like you just could go in your sweatpants? Like you could go and you feel comfortable, you feel seen, you feel comfortable being there. And that's that idea of just feeling like you belong and you see yourself in the brand. So I think when we think about brand relevancy, going back to our brand purpose, as there was another really great example this morning of like strategy being the bodyguard, right? Like lets you in or out of an idea or saying yes to something. For us, that's our brand purpose. Like, are we staying true to our North Stars of hosting and creating day-making experiences? And that helps us, I think, stay relevant no matter where our brand is showing up.
That's awesome. I don't know how I can follow that for sure. From a Bob Evans standpoint, we have a really strong brand awareness in the Midwest, in the South, and the East. That's mainly attributed to the restaurant. I mean, nowadays, people still think about us as a restaurant. The West market is still an opportunity area. So for us, from a brand perspective, we need to make sure to understand who is our target audience, who is the people that we're going to be talking about. For Bob Evans, such a traditional brand, we're all about that family solution. Consumers that are looking for that easy meal solution, spending less time cooking, but more time with the family. So we want to make sure that we're talking to the right consumer, and at the same time, partnering with the retailer as well when it comes to the retailer go-to-market strategy.
I like what you were saying about like making consumers feel seen. I think that's like a thing as marketers, right? Like, and as creatives and marketers, there's always this kind of like battle. Like, are you creating for yourself? Like, do you think it's a good idea, or do you think it's a good idea for your consumers, right? And it's just like that classic, like, you want to speak to your consumer, not at them, right? And I think that's just something that like, always has to be top of mind. So I really like that point.
Marketing for marketers.
Yeah, right.
We do that a lot.
It's hard to be disciplined there. So this is actually sort of tagging along to that then. What are different and unique ways you have told your brand story, so not told it at the consumer, talked to the consumer about a brand story to reach a new audience?
Yeah, another great question. Thank you. So for us, one of the first things when I started, I've been at Shinola for about 14 months now, and one of the first things for me was, understanding, the brand, but then it was also, how can my first week there, I had a tour of the watch factory, right? And I didn't start wearing watches until I started working at Shinola. Was never a watch guy.
It didn't happen. But
I went to the factory, and you're seeing 100 people make watches, every single day. And, we do about 100,000 watches a year out of the factory in Detroit. And just to see, just to be in that factory, right? It's a clean room. So you're like, I'm wearing the smocks and got the hairnet on and everything. And walking around, I just had such an appreciation for the process and craft. And then instantly I'm like, all right, I can't bring everybody to Detroit. I wish I could. If anyone is ever in Detroit and wants a tour, just let me know. But through content, I can bring Detroit to everybody, right? So we sat down with the team and we were thinking all right, what can we do? When the brand first started, we did a ton of content around the factory, and it was more so just highly, editorial, here's how we build a watch. And I was like, this is just for the purist, this is great, right? But we need to figure out how do we talk to the tourists, right? So I'm just, a lot of my process for creating is I have two rules when I put something out in market. The first rule is, would I, as a consumer, engage with this, right? Would I actually stop and watch this thing, click this article, whatever? The second rule is, would I share it with my family? Would I be proud to say I did this, right? And if I can't answer yes, then I'm probably not, that's kind of my, I'm probably not going to, push this forward, right? So I'm sitting at home, and I'm watching Hot Ones, because everyone watches Hot Ones, and I'm like, oh my God, that's it. We need to create our version of Hot Ones. So we started a show called The Movement. And basically, it's the first ever watchmaking interview show. So what we do is we bring celebrities into the watch factory. We get them smocked up in, the hairnet and everything. And we have them attempt to build a watch, right? And we just released the first season last year. And it's been going really, really well. We were able to pull some pretty big talent. We got for season 1, we had Tim Robinson, Sam Richardson, Royce the 5'9", Alice Cooper, Jaden Ivey from the Pistons. And what we noticed is, people, when we put the ask out, most celebrities go, wait, I get to build a watch? And we're like, yes. And they're like, cool, I'll do it for free. Which is incredible, right? Because we're still a very small brand. So just giving them that experience, they get super into it, right? Versus just a regular, kind of interview talk show host. But it also gives us as a brand kind of the right to play in these cultural spaces, right? We would never, do, a partnership or content with a celebrity for the sake of their likeness. But if we bring them into our world, right, we have that right to play in those spaces. So it's been a big part of our strategy as far as storytelling goes, is creating this content that's unique to us, right? And another thing on, the watch end of it, Rolex is never going to invite you to their factory, right? They're just not, right? So for us in the watch world, it's also kind of having the same effect with the purists, because most people who are avid watch collectors understand, the different movements and how they work, but most of them have never seen a watch put together, right? And they don't, and to see the intricacies and the nuances of how that process works. So we're using content to educate, to entertain, and we're noticing this huge bounce back, right? So Tim Robinson just won an Emmy for I Think You Should Leave, and that video ended up getting 30,000 more views, and it's been out for 3 or 4 months already. It got another 30,000 views organically just because he won the Emmy and he was trending again. So now we have this bounce back where if you're Googling, Royce the 5'9" interview, Shinola that interview he did with us starts popping up, right? So we're kind of creating this ecosystem, and it's all just through content, right? But again, it's making sure that the content we're creating is true and unique to us, right? And it's a thing that no other watch brand would do, right? And we think we're working, and we think we kind of found the sweet spot of this show. So that's kind of one example of how we're using kind of storytelling in an untraditional way to speak to new audiences.
That's awesome. So the question being, how do you use storytelling to reach new audiences? This is one that has been fun for me to think about. I mentioned, Caribou Coffee is 32 years old. We started in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and really our growth kind of bubbled from there. I joined the company 6 years ago, and if a lot of you are obviously from Chicago, Chicago. There was a time when Caribou was in Chicago. We may or may not be coming back. There's exciting growth plans ahead of us, but I say that because, the markets that we've been in for a really long time, and so there wasn't really a strong brand desire, again, small teams, smaller budgets, to build out these assets that kind of told our story of who we were. In terms of reaching new audiences, when I joined 6 years ago, and our team, the last few years specifically, if you did kind of a deeper search on our website of who Caribou Coffee is, you couldn't find it, right? Like, you didn't get the stories of who we are, why we are, the beloved brand in Minnesota, our commitment to real ingredients. There's real chocolate chips in every single mocha and hot chocolate, our commitment to responsible sourcing. Like, none of those stories were really out there. We told those stories internally. So we had really, really strong internal communications, brand communications to our team members. Our teams went through incredible training, but we really didn't share a lot of our stories externally. So, don't Google us yet. There's a couple of good things on there. We're building it, but just 2 years ago, we launched our first ESG and brand storytelling report. So we've always had internal do-good reports that have been kind of sharing our stories of who we are, employee volunteering, our commitments at origin, but we've never shared those stories externally. So 2 years ago was the first time we did that. So the ESG in my title, and the reason ESG, it can live a number of different places in a brand. It really is, your commitment to, how your brand shows up in the world, and your commitments to social and environmental sustainability. But for us, that has always been true to our brand. So it also needs to be really, really true to our brand storytelling. So my roundabout answer of kind of reaching new audiences is we're entering new markets, and we're trying to, share with people who we are, those same messages of, well, we're launching a new product, or, this is coming. They don't resonate when you don't know who the brand is. And so we've had to make sure that when those people, our new guests, our new consumers in new markets are clicking in to either our social or our website, or trying to do a little bit more research of who Caribou is as we're entering a market, that those stories are there. And so we've really been kind of pushed, especially in a product-driven kind of brand of the past, where our marketing windows were really driven by, the newest product launch. Everything was kind of about what's coming next. We've really had to push ourselves to think about stronger brand narrative campaigns on top of that, especially in new markets. So actually this summer, we'll be launching our first bigger brand national campaign for the first time in about 8 years. And even then, it was really focused on the Minneapolis-St. Paul market. So this will be in new markets that we're going in as well. So it's really exciting, but it's challenging, because it's things that you feel like your teams know, as a brand champion, but when you're entering new markets and people don't know those stories, it's challenged us to make sure we're doing that work behind the scenes to kind of build that authenticity in our storytelling as well.
That's great. From a brand storytelling perspective, my team worked really closely with the brand team. Our brand team have done an amazing job when it comes to the storytelling. They have partnered with celebrities in the past from a campaign standpoint, talking about love at first bite. And then from that campaign, we're moving into more from a food-centric standpoint. We have a new campaign that's going to be launching next month, where from our perspective, from a shopper marketing lens, we work very closely with the brand team to take the brand commercial idea and take that storytelling and how can we customize it from a retail standpoint. So we work really closely with the retailers and making sure that we're talking to that consumer, understanding that behavior, and understanding what's going to be those vehicles to reach them in order to drive that conversion. But at the same time is personalization. We know nowadays consumers are looking for personalization, but on my end, from a shopper marketing standpoint, it's all about taking that brand commercial idea and how to make sure that we're talking to the right consumer, because we're not going to be able to cookie cutter anything like, for example, for Walmart, doesn't work for H-E-B. Each retailer, their consumer, their shopper is different. So we want to make sure to tell the right story to the right consumer.
I really like what you said about like understanding your brand. And I think that's like such a great point, because I always tell the team that what we say no to is more important than the things we actually do, right? And like understanding like who we are, what we're about, why we exist. Like, I think sometimes that gets lost, right? Because we live in this world where like, all the algorithms are pushing the trends and every brand is jumping on these trends. And it's like, we would never do that as a brand, right? So like, where I see so many brands and creators like kind of, chase the trends and the waves, and, it's all like this, like, they want the vanity metrics, but is it really pushing the brand forward, right? Like, so that's a really, really awesome point that I think, oftentimes like it seems like it should be top of mind, but like, it's hard to live your brand truth in a world where, all of us, we're beholden to, KPIs and growing, our revenue, our social following. And so it's like, it's easy to be like, oh, we should just jump on this trend because it's going to help. But in the long run, I've noticed things like that actually, end up just hurting the brand. So it's a really good point.
Well, and I think this is kind of rounds us back to what the next question was going to be about. And this has come up a lot today. And it's really around how you segment and target your consumers. When you're wanting to maintain your brand identity, there is such thing as going too far there, right? Or not hitting the mark exactly. So Tony, I'll start with you because I know this is definitely even more relevant in your shopper role, but how does your brand then decide that they're going to go after and when targeting and segmenting consumers to reach
Yeah,
them
that's
differently?
a really great question. When it comes to brand identity, Bob Evans, as I mentioned before, the refrigerated retail business was part of the restaurant for a very long time. As of today, some consumers will still think about us as a restaurant, right? I even have friends that will say, hey, I went to Bob Evans for dinner tonight. What they should be saying is, I went to the grocery store and pick up your refrigerated mashed potato. That's the right answer. So I also mentioned like, hey, we have a strong brand presence here in the Midwest, in the South, and the East. West continues to be an opportunity for us. One of the things that, that's one of the things that we will do is we want to make sure that we're talking to the right audience. When it comes to either what type of like tactic or vehicle, but it's all about that brand partnership and that strategic thinking to make sure that we're driving the household penetration. As you know, Bob Evans is such a traditional brand that our consumer actually index high with the boomers. And as we all know, boomers will eventually exit the category. So we need to start talking and start reaching the younger millennial, start teaching them about that tradition, about the meal solution, the busy family that are looking for those meal occasions, looking for spending less time cooking, but more time with the family. So those are the things that we want to make sure that we target the consumer and talk to the retailer as well.
Such a good question. I know we did kind of answer this a little bit in the last question, but when I think about segmenting and targeting guests in historical years at Caribou, that's really meant our loyalty program. So we have a really strong loyalty program at Caribou. Over 60% of our guests are actually enrolled in our Caribou Perks program, which is a really, really good thing. Thank you, Anne. It's a really, really good thing, but it's also there's a fine line where it's not a great thing because you actually need to bring a lot more people into the top part of the funnel. And so when we've talked about segmenting guests in the past, and again kind of limited budgets and trying to reach a lot of different people that visit Caribou, we've done a lot of segmenting through our loyalty program. It's who we know the most about. It's where we can make the most kind of moves in terms of strategic positioning on limited budgets around discounting, or we know what you drink, we know what why you go in, and thinking about that behavior. Where it's gotten more challenging for us, and I think will continue to be where we need to focus more time and resources, is how we're segmenting and getting really strategic with our spend for new guests. And so, again, I was talking about us kind of entering new markets. We recently opened stores and reopened stores in Ohio, in Michigan, Florida. And so, again, I don't know this for a fact, but those were all markets we were in when we were in Chicago. So there's got to be a fourth coming. But so yeah, I know. I mean, I'm not breaking anything, I promise. PRs, yeah. But it would be so. The exciting thing about the markets that we've re-entered is there's some strategy there. Those are markets we've been in before. People know us. We left about 12 years ago, and the number one thing we have heard from those guests is like, oh my God, I miss Caribou. Like, when are you coming back to Caribou? They're still our followers on social, which is really interesting. So we've become a brand that even when we've left a market, we continue to have, guests following us. So we've tried to be strategic in how we're talking about new store marketing and opening in new markets to really make sure we're kind of tapping into those brand truths and leaning into people that know our brand enough to help us share and amplify those stories where we might not have, large ad budgets to be able to target and segment a bunch of different audiences in a market. And so we stood up a new brand ambassador program this past year. And, we've done work with influencers in the past. We've done ambassador work in Minneapolis, St. Paul before. But it's been really, really cool to see our brand ambassador program in these new markets that we've gone into, because we've specifically looked for not necessarily people with the most followers, but people who know our brand and can speak to our brand. Like, oh my gosh, I used to go to Caribou. I've gone to Caribou, when I lived in Minnesota. And so the content they're creating, the stories they're creating for us have helped us kind of target and be more strategic with how we message in those new markets when we know, our audience for any coffee shop, but, for Caribou, where we are trying to, make sure we're the neighborhood go-to for, for everyone, that we're being strategic with how we're reaching people in the most authentic way.
So I'm not anti-data, but I kind of have a hot take. I find it very hard to believe someone's seen like a programmatic ad and is like, oh, I'm going to buy that $2,000 watch, right? So for us, it's a little different. Like we make things that there's a longer kind of purchase journey, right? People, when they buy a watch, they think about that purchase for 2, 3, 4, 5 months, right? So for us, obviously data is important, but, devil's advocate, you can always make the data say what you want it to say. So we just focus on what we do best, right? We focus on manufacturing the best product we can make and delivering kind of the best experience, whether that's, in our retail stores or digitally. But for us, it's, we work to create kind of longer relationships with our consumers, right? So it's kind of funny because most people get introduced to the brand through the notebooks, right? It's a relatively cheaper price point compared to a watch. But, what we find is, we can kind of take people through this journey, and it's kind of funny. So in the last year, I've been, going out to our different markets and talking to consumers, and everyone has like a Shinola story, right? Everyone's got the story like, oh, like my first watch is a gift from my father, or I just graduated college and I wanted to treat myself, so I bought a Runwell, or I just got a big promotion, so I bought your GMT automatic. So, or I just got married and, I wanted to celebrate the moment. So what we focus on is how can we kind of keep creating kind of those moments for our consumers, right? And, at the end of the day, we sell like luxury goods that people don't necessarily need, right? But there is this like emotional attachment to these products. And those are like, that to me is the strongest thing you can ever have. Every time, if you get that first watch when you graduate, or you get that first watch when you get married, every time you see that watch or put it on, you're going to think about that moment, right? And like, there's no ad in the world that can recreate what that person feels in that moment. So we just try to focus on just being there and creating those moments and creating products that our consumers are going to like and enjoy. So again, not anti-data, but we focus. Our philosophy and approach is to keep creating those moments.
So I want to say one comment over here. What I love about this panel is we have such a different background. We have luxury brand, we have retail, and we have consumer packaged goods. We're all about the data. We partner definitely with, we want to understand the data. We want to understand the first party data. How am I going to be able to reach my current buyer, my last buyer, and my competitor? So for us, we have proven to, very successful campaign-wise when we partner with retailers. We're a huge fan of 8451. We partner also with Doe MC as well. Anything when it comes to retail media, it is such a hot topic nowadays for us from a consumer packaged good to understand where is the consumer, how is the consumer shopping. If the consumer, if he or she is doing click and collect, online grocery shopping, how that person is shopping nowadays from an omni-commerce perspective. So for us, data is a key attribution and metric for sure.
So, and being at Fetch, I love myself some data, but that's okay. We don't sell a lot of watches on Fetch either. But what I was going to say is, I think Tony, you brought up the right point. It's about that purchase cycle and the purchase frequency. And when you're selling a luxury good, that's just going to be a totally different proposition. So it's just fun to, like I said, the nuances across all three of the segments is really, really critical to understand here. So we're going to go back to Kayleen because you've been talking a lot about this like exciting market expansion that is coming. But really, you've been in and you've been out. And I think with all of us, like we said, these Midwest brands, how do you know that you can really expand into a different market and then like gasp, even be global someday?
Yeah, no, I love this question. And I think, like I said, I've been at Caribou for 6 years. We've been around for 32, and it's really interesting, I'm sure, for a lot of other brands in the room to kind of peel the layers back and kind of see your brand story and see where there have been really exciting times for growth, right? Like this isn't the first time someone has been, maybe on this panel, but, talking about Caribou Coffee and this like exciting growth that's ahead of us. I think why we are, really excited about the growth that's ahead of us right now is because of some of the bumps along the way and some of the growth that we know has been successful and unsuccessful in certain markets and ways. And so, and then thinking about brand and brand identity as a part of all of that. And so just quickly, because I'm not sure if it's a well-known fact, but we have 800 coffee houses in 11 different countries. 9 of them are actually overseas. And so the 11th country was Morocco. I just mentioned, I think on one of the earlier questions. But for the most part, our core Caribou Coffee audience that we all know is, based in Minnesota. Of our 500 locations that are in the US, 300 of them are in Minnesota, right? So the growth that I'm talking about that's ahead of us, our international teams are growing like crazy as well, but the growth that's ahead of us here is franchise growth in domestic markets. And so we'll continue to grow Caribou Coffee in the upper Midwest as company-owned development, but we've signed on with some really exciting franchise partners to help us grow domestically in the US. And so I mentioned growth before. We're partnering with sophisticated operators that are opening, 80 to 150 stores, not 1 or 2. And I think that was a really intentional decision because of, all the things we've been talking about up here of ensuring that those brand truths are true and continue to stay true. When you franchise and you grow, you do lose a bit of your control. And there's been some interesting, meetings and conversations the last couple of years of like, okay, well, what about this? What about this? How do we ensure our brand is, consistent and stays consistent as we think about our domestic growth and our, eventually becoming a global brand? We are also a CPG company, but in a different way. We have Caribou Coffee and grocery in all 50 states, but really at the core of who we are, it is our coffee house experience. And so, and thinking about this question around, how you can ensure that growth is successful and your brand stays, kind of relevant and true to who you are through that growth. One of my favorite examples is the international stores that we talk about. It's kind of this hidden secret of Caribou that we have 300 locations, overseas. I was able to visit with one of our largest franchisees based out of the UAE earlier this year, and I toured stores over there. And so if you visit a Caribou in Minnesota or in the upper Midwest, the things that you probably remember are like really friendly team, right? Like you felt really good going into the store, people were friendly, and then the products were really good. So like great taste, real chocolate chips, like those are the things that are just really true. And I'm like, there's no way that like it feels the same walking into a Caribou Coffee in UAE or in, Abu Dhabi. And it does. It's so bizarre. You walk in and the team is just as passionate about the brand, and they're not from Minnesota. A lot of it is, especially UAE, it's most of the population is expats. They're from, other parts of the country. And the love for the brand that is rooted in kind of who our brand has always been is so strong that it translates to that experience. So I say that in that we've learned a lot from that international growth and how we've entered markets in the U.S. And where we're excited about the growth that's ahead of us is we know the partners we've partnered with kind of know Caribou, know who we are. They believe in that purpose and they believe in kind of that core brand promise. And we're really excited to be opening, stores in markets that knew us, in Michigan, in Ohio, in Florida, but also in markets that don't know who we are. So that's going to be, kind of an interesting next few years for us. But yeah, I think it's, there's challenges. The one example I'll give, because not everything is, shiny and rainbows and great, successes in terms of growth. We, a few years ago launched, drive-through was all the rage, right? And so we launched a new concept called the Caribou Cabin. So if anybody seen the Caribou Cabins, they're little blue. Yes, if you're from Minnesota. So it's a 500-foot Caribou Coffee, and it's drive-through only, and it's adorable, and you can put them anywhere, they go up quicker. And in Minnesota, if you know the brand, there's probably a Caribou Cabin surrounded by 15 other Caribou coffee houses where you get that full experience. And so our growth the last 3 or 4 years was really centered around this cabin model. And so there's over 75 cabins now in Minnesota. That was what franchisees were really attracted to at first. It's a, smaller build, it's less expensive to put up, but you really don't get that Caribou experience. You do a bit, through the friendliness, through the product, but what we've learned going into new markets where cabins were the first thing that we opened, people didn't really get us. They didn't really get that full experience. And so our development strategy has changed a bit, and even our marketing strategy around how are we going in and thinking about Caribou coffee as an experience, not just in our coffee houses, but partnerships and things that we do to ensure we can be that local go-to that we are in the markets that know and love us. So, yeah.
You guys going to get outside of your areas, go global?
I will say it's an area of opportunity for now. We're still trying to focus here in the US, so that's our main core market. So.
Yeah, I think for us, growth is a couple different things, right? So for one, we started as a watch brand, right? We're American manufacturing watch brand. And in the last 10 years, since the brand's been around, we've introduced leather. So we have a world-class leather program, incredible bags, and accessories. We introduced pet, so we have an incredible pet line. We introduced jewelry and home goods. And then also, too, 5 years ago, we opened a hotel. So we have the Shinola Hotel in Detroit. It's, not even being biased, one of the most incredible properties I've just ever seen in my life. We renovated 3 existing buildings downtown, and I think it's 176 room hotel. And for us, it is a physical kind of representation of the brand, right? And if you're ever in Detroit, please come in. The living, we call it the living room. The lobby is just beautiful. We worked with a local art gallery to curate the art in the space, and there's so many Easter eggs in the hotel. So one great thing that, again, for the purists, the shape of the faucet handles are the exact shape of the screws that go into the back of the watch. So every detail of this hotel is just been thought through. So we think about growth in what we offer, right? And then also too, retail is a big part of our business, right? Again, the product is something that you want to touch and feel and hold and put on. So I think we were in London and Toronto, but closed both those stores during the pandemic. Just through the uncertainty, we had an opportunity to get out of some leases, so we did. So we've been global. Will we go back? Obviously, we want to, but a lot of things, a lot of other things have to happen. And then, I think for us, a big part of our growth in the next 5 years is us aggressively expanding hospitality. So we're looking into, what does a collection of Shinola hotels look like? Not only, in Detroit, but other cities. So we're kind of thinking about it, in a couple different ways.
Sounds fab. Well, I just got the 5-minute warning bell. So why don't we open up for Q&A?
I think it's interesting that the two of you on the end are kind of doing the opposite, right? So you have a restaurant, but you're focused on promoting the in-store product. You have in-store products, but you're focused on the restaurant. So do you have some continuity of brand, right? Because you know that when Caribou Coffee goes into the stores, that's going to affect your retail or your restaurant business, vice versa. When someone is experiencing a Bob Evans restaurant, that's going to affect their opinion of the product in the store. So consistency of branding across retail and restaurant.
It's such a good question, and is one that if anybody follows Caribou Coffee closely in the news knows that we just signed a large licensing agreement to JDE Pete's to actually license our brand in the CPG space. So they will actually take on what they are like powerhouses in is kind of representing brands and selling brands into CPG as a part of that process, which has been what has been really interesting is, and speaking of kind of brand relevancy, is ensuring that agreement stays consistent to who our brand is. So consistency in quality and in sourcing, et cetera. So the Caribou coffee you have on your shelves will not in CPG a year from now, because it's distributed by JD Pete's, will not taste different. But to your point about, how you compete with yourselves a bit in market. One thing that we're excited about kind of bringing back as a part of this deal is the growth in CPG is a really great thing for us as we think about growing our brand awareness across the U.S. With a partner that candidly has a lot more expertise in that area than we do. And where we get to focus is on that in-store experience and growing kind of that brand loyalty through that experience. And so what we've talked about is how the exclusives that you can only get in Caribou coffee houses today, so our Amy's blend, which is in stores right now, our La Manita that launches in the fall, a lot of our single origins that are there, the lots that we source from aren't large enough to be able to kind of go into CPG. They're only available in our coffee houses. How we can leverage kind of those brands and that coffee to kind of build that brand loyalty to our coffee houses, but also to our coffee that translates in interesting ways to kind of growing our brand presence in CPG. So it's an interesting balance, but yeah, we are in kind of a different, our focus is on the coffee house space, but we know that the CPG piece of it is so valuable to us, especially as that could be the very first place that people know or try our brand as well, so.
So I will have to agree. It's a really, really nice question because we try very hard to differentiate ourselves from the restaurant because we have no relationship with the restaurant. On our end, we want to make sure like every single time when we speak to our consumer, it's all about the awareness, that education, more about that mealtime solution that you're going to be spending less time cooking but more time with the family. From a restaurant standpoint, there's all about going to the restaurant experience, but instead of going to the restaurant, bring the restaurant experience at home. So that's when we'll focus more on the retail side and making sure like our communication and messaging is targeted and very personalized to the end consumer. Again, through the length of the grocery channels, depending on who are we talking to, either it is Kroger, it is Albertsons and Safeway. So it's understanding that retail perspective as well.
Hi, Valerie Sokolova. I lead the Heinz Innovation Strategy. Thank you for your insights. Kind of tying into Tony and Kaylee, what you were saying, in terms of tapping into emerging and existing consumer demand moments, like spending less time creating the meal and more time enjoying it with your family, like creating those moments of connectedness, togetherness, belonging. A lot of us work on similar categories, adjacencies, and we're probably seeing very similar consumer drivers and motivations and what we want to tap into. Understanding that context, how do you find your own meaningful point of difference amidst all of us trying to tap into very similar consumer behaviors and motivations? How do you create your own story? How do you identify something that's ownable and makes it unique to your brands?
Man, you guys have a really great question, though, seriously. I will have to say, making ownable, that's going to come down to how you're going to take, on our end, the brand commercial idea to understanding the target segment that you're trying to reach to. But from a vehicle standpoint, we're a huge believer of test and learn, because at the end of the day, if we don't test and learn a specific tactic or a specific influencer or a specific vehicle, you never know what's going to be the ROI. We have been doing a lot of test and learn in regards to digital activation. We know that our consumers are on mobile. We know that they're also on social. So we also have a lot of relationship with brand influencer when it comes to like providing that easy meal solution type of recipe-wise, but making things like our recipes that are shoppable as well. So it's all about the test and learn for us. So making sure that we carry that story to the consumer.
And just quickly, I love this question because it's really hard. And I think to your point, when I think about Caribou, you think about Starbucks, you think about Dunkin', you think about that coffee house experience. A lot of things that I talked about in terms of connection or coffee being like that bright spot in your day could translate to a lot of different brands. And so I think I loved that bodyguard example. I'm probably going to use that a ton, like your strategy and your North Star being like the bodyguard that lets you in and out of the room. I think for us, it's like knowing that we have these shared values with other coffee houses. And that is something that can be achieved through, product innovation or X, Y, and Z, but how are our differentiators really where we're leading? So we do this like, yell, talk, whisper in terms of our messaging. And I think we always want to make sure that our differentiators in that space, whether it's, so we talk about being the local go-to. So we might want to have that same feeling and that respite experience as your local third wave coffee shop down the street. But we want you to go sometimes more than once a day, right? Or sometimes, probably every day, or you're bringing your kids. And so that's where price point or like innovation or things come in. So I think there's a lot of different things that we talk about, but that North Star of those like differentiators, I think is where we try to make sure we always have kind of visible no matter who we're talking to, so that, we are breaking through the clutter in a space that can be relevant to a number of different brands.
One thing I'm going to add as well is, understanding the macro environment, especially nowadays with the inflation keep going up, the product that you're going to be putting out there, what is the value you're offering to the consumer? Is it a saving or a time saving? So understanding your brand proposition and the value you offer to the consumer. Again, value can mean a lot of things. It can be discount, but at the same time, it can be saving time. So in that way, I can spend more time with my family.